Spotify has lost billions in market value following the controversy with Joe Rogan and Neil Young. So Neil Young, of course, has pulled his music off of Spotify due to the misinformation being spread by Joe Rogan. Other artists have come out in support of Neil Young, though there is some misinformation about who has actually pulled their music off of Spotify and who hasn't. So I'll get to clearing some of that up in a bit here. But first here, you see from Datebook, and you can go look, there is other estimations around 2 billion. So, this number is going to fluctuate because it is market value. But Spotify loses 4 billion in market value following Neil Young controversy. They go on to right here, as of Friday, January 28th, shares of Spotify were down about 12% from where they closed last week, according to data from NASDAQ. The hashtags delete Spotify and cancel Spotify also gained traction on social media, with many websites offering step-by-step instructions for users to remove the app from their devices. Now, it's very likely this will rebound, and Spotify, their market value will be fine, but they have definitely lost some subscribers. That information, of course, is not going to be public because that's with Spotify, but it has had an impact. Now, I think Spotify is going to ride this out. I don't think they're going to, end their contract with Rogan. I guess the only way they could do that is by buying him out. If they think this is going to be a long-term issue for them, then maybe they will do that. But I really don't see that happening. The deal is reportedly worth $100 million. I don't think they're going to, remove Joe Rogan at this point. But there are, as was discussed in that article, there are many people that are canceling their Spotify subscriptions. You see here, Needle Drop, Anthony Fantano, one of the biggest music reviewers on YouTube, if not the biggest. He canceled his Spotify subscription, though he goes on to say that he really only used Apple Music, so it wasn't really his primary source for music anyways. But he also goes on to say, look, that doesn't mean he's urging everyone to copy him or anything like that. He just wants to, show what he is doing, and he doesn't think Spotify Premium is worth it. And also, Spotify is known for not paying artists enough. So I'm sure that, plays into the decision for a lot of people as well. Now, the controversy erupted after Rogan featured Dr. Robert Malone on his podcast last month. Malone has been banned from Twitter for spreading misinformation, but has become a hero in the anti-vaccine community for falsely suggesting that millions of people had been hypnotized into believing that the vaccines work to prevent serious disease. Quote, Spotify has recently become a very damaging force via its public misinformation and lies about COVID, Young wrote in a letter posted to his website on Wednesday. Most of the listeners hearing the unfactual, misleading, and false COVID information on Spotify are 24 years old, impressionable, and easy to swing to the wrong side of the truth. And that is so very true. Now, I will get to an update from Neil Young and what he put out recently in a statement, as there seems to be some, people confused here about what Neil Young's point is with all of this. But Spotify has claimed that so on Wednesday they took down all of Young's music after Neil Young requested that. But they claim they have removed over 20,000 podcast episodes related to COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. But they haven't removed Rogan's episodes. That episode with Dr. Robert Malone is still up. I just checked before recording this. That's still up there. Even though he was banned on Twitter, he's spreading a lot of bullshit around this. So they're very selective, apparently, with who they remove and who they don't. So, of course, Rogan having a contract with them, and I'm sure in that contract, Rogan is allowed to say whatever he wants. Otherwise, why would he sign that kind of deal? So that's why I imagine Rogan's podcasts have not been removed. But so in a follow-up letter on his website on Friday, Young clarified that the point of his protest was not to censor the podcast host. Quote, I support free speech. I have never been in favor of censorship. Private companies have the right to choose what they profit from, just as I can choose not to have my music support a platform that disseminates harmful information, Young said. I am happy and proud to stand in solidarity with the frontline healthcare worker who risk their lives every day to help others. So, to be clear here, he's not trying to censor Joe Rogan. Even if Spotify chose Neil Young over Rogan, Rogan would what? He would still be on other podcast apps. He would still be on YouTube. He would still be everywhere else. So, having him not exclusive to Spotify wouldn't remove or censor Rogan in any way. Like you can't censor somebody that big with that kind of platform unless every single platform is in on it, and that's not going to happen with the kind of money they make off of Joe Rogan. So the whole look, this is also why I don't really think canceling Spotify or trying to cancel Rogan on Spotify is ultimately does anything. Because even if that were to happen, he's just going to go to YouTube and other podcast apps. Like, he's not going to go anywhere. So I'm not really sure really, if Spotify were to do anything with Rogan in terms of, getting rid of this contract, it would really just purely be about their own self-image and trying to, retain market value and trying to retain subscribers. It would have nothing to do with actually impacting the misinformation being spread by Rogan's podcast. Now, to be clear as well, Rogan occasionally has people on, rarely has people on that actually challenge him. I covered recently, Josh Sepps challenged him on misinformation that Rogan put out about myocarditis and COVID-19. And that was a great example of Rogan being occasionally, rarely willing to have those kinds of conversations. This is why also I always say this because it's important for the audience out there that do listen to Rogan, that understand, I want them to understand that, I'm not just blindly saying that Rogan's terrible, because I used to watch him for a while. For like several years, I would watch basically every episode. But I stopped watching him because it was just a lot of garbage. He had on more and more garbage guests, less and less people that are actually intelligent and worth listening to. So I stopped listening. And Rogan now only occasionally has those kinds of guests on, like a Josh Sepps, or Cornel West was on 3 years ago. Bernie Sanders on 3 years ago. So these sorts of guests are incredibly rare. When he has any conversations now, especially about the vaccines, it is just completely, absurd. Just conspiracy after conspiracy, insane bullshit, and he's spreading it to millions of people. Hopefully, most people just take this, if they listen, they're not taking him seriously. They're listening for fun. The podcast can be funny occasionally, so maybe they're enjoying it for that, but don't take science advice from Joe Rogan. I hope that's clear. Now, let's clear up some of the misinformation around who has and hasn't pulled their music off of Spotify. So there was some rumors about Barry Manilow doing this, but he hasn't. So he's put out on Twitter saying, I recently heard a rumor about me and Spotify. I don't know where it started, but it didn't start with me or anyone who represents me. So Manilow is still on Spotify. Peter Frampton came out in support of Neil Young, but his music is still on Spotify. So his music isn't pulled down either. Though Joni Mitchell she did pull down her content, her music off Spotify. So she put out this statement here saying, I stand with Neil Young. I've decided to remove all my music from Spotify. Irresponsible people are spreading lies that are costing people their lives. I stand in solidarity with Neil Young and the global scientific and medical communities on this issue. From Joni Mitchell. So there you go. Another Canadian here standing in solidarity with Neil Young, pulling their music off of Spotify. And one last thing here. I mentioned Josh Sepps earlier. He just goes on to point out that, if Spotify dropped Joe Rogan, he'd go from being the man with the biggest podcast in the world to being nothing more than, checks notes, the man with the biggest podcast in the world. Exactly right. Nothing would change. So even if Spotify did what they are being asked to do by some people, it wouldn't make a single difference.